My name is David Gojes. I'm here with Professor Dag O. Hessen. Dag is a professor in biology at the University of Oslo, and he's known for his work in water, researching water, ecosystems, ecology, and evolution. Dag has received many awards for his work, disseminating knowledge, but also has highly cited scientific articles, including, I'm going to read, Lakes as Sentinels of Climate Change. You are also a member of the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters. And now his book, Verden på vippepunktet, which we can translate as the world on the tipping point, roughly.
Yeah, something like that, I assume. Yeah.
Has now been translated to Spanish. So we're here to talk about your book, but before we get there, I want to ask some questions about the background. So welcome to this interview, Dag.
Thank you, and I'm really grateful for the translation into Spanish, absolutely, so thank you.
Yeah, so my first question is, what got you interested in biology? Why did you want to study biology, and what has kept you interested for so many years?
Yeah, well, the last part is easy to answer. Once you are trapped in biology, you remain there because there are so tremendously many important and interesting topics. So, but why I first became interested, that's a more difficult question. I was a kid, as long as I can remember, I've been interested in natural sciences and had this fascination for nature and the love of being out there in nature. But actually I was on the border to studying medicine because I would like to do some things that had to do with research and things that was seen as meaningful, and I wasn't quite sure if I could do that as a biologist. But I realized that definitely I could do, so I ended up with biology, and I'm really happy about that, and I stayed there since. So, and it started with this passion for nature and interest in everything that was living, especially birds, as for many. But later on, I've been moving more and more. Well, I had a period where I was also working with the evolutionary aspects of cell evolution and organism evolution. But more and more lately, I've moved into the aspect of loss of nature combined with climate change. So these days, I'm working mostly with carbon cycle and climate change.
Okay, so I am a social scientist. Many of the readers have different backgrounds, professions. And something that I have always wondered is, what does a biologist do as a biologist? So how can you describe your profession? What do you do?
I think biology, like all disciplines, have become more and more fragmented. I mean, a century ago, any biologist knew pretty much everything about biology. But now this is highly specialized. And the big divide is, of course, between molecular biology and ecology and evolution. But these days, and we do that quite a bit, use also DNA sequencing and molecular tools to understand evolution and ecosystem processes. So, but we do everything from really working with how protein folds. There are people spending their entire career on a single protein. To really understand the global issues of carbon cycling and the risk of tipping point and these things that I'm into these days. Yeah. So basically everything, but I think also we see that now biologists are cooperating. At least we try to do that more and more with social scientists than other disciplines, because these big issues that has to do with loss of nature and climate change can clearly not be solved by a biologist alone. We need to team up with everything from psychology to social science to law and, economy.
And in practice, what does it mean to be a biologist? So before we started the interview, we had a conversation about climbing, for instance. And in the book, you have some anecdotes about how you are out in fieldwork. So how do you collect your knowledge? How do you collect the information to then analyze?
Yeah, well, again, some biologists are purely theoretical. They work with models and are never setting their foot out, or other deal with dedicated experiments where they can do this at the molecular level or at somewhat higher level, but still they do this as experimental units with lots of analysis and measurements. Other again are purely theoretical, but many people, and this is the old part of biology, has to do with going out in nature, describing what you see. That was the first part of it. Then understanding how things are fitting together, and more recently understanding how humans impact these processes and impact nature, not only climate but pretty much everything, because nowadays almost everything in nature is somehow affected by human activity.
Right, and you said that once you are doing biology, you are hooked. So
Yeah.
was that part of that outdoors experience, seeing nature and what we humans are doing to nature, what hooked you to biology?
Well, first of all, it was being out there simply to experience nature. I've been in rainforest. I've been at Svalbard, encountering polar bears and experiencing beautiful landscapes. So this passion of nature is part of it, but also to gain insight, to do measurements, to see how this fits, how it explains what you try to explain, plotting numbers. So I like numbers and see how this fits and running stats on this. But I think this fascination for what you are working with is something that all scientists can feel, disregarding what kind of topic you work with.
Yeah, of course. So you have written many scientific articles for journals, but you have also written popular books or more accessible books. What was what motivates you to write also those other types of outputs that are not academic purely?
Yeah, I've been reading some popular science book when I was a student that really made me think that, well, this is important, this is a good way of disseminating it. And I think when I read Richard Dawkins' books, I was immensely inspired, because I realized it was possible to explain complex issues with great importance to the public. Besides, I was lucky enough to grew up in a pre-digital world, so I learned to read books. I always liked reading, and by that I also learned writing. So it's a combination of two things. I like writing, but I also realized that the best way probably to disseminate important messages to people in general is not only to write another scientific paper, I do that as well, but to write books. And I think some of these books are the most important things I've done as a scientist.
All right.
Because it reaches, at least potentially, it reaches a wider audience.
And with this specific book, what motivated you to write it? When did the idea come?
Yeah, I had it for a while because I've been increasingly concerned, like many of us, with the things we see happen around, with loss of nature, loss of biodiversity, not the least climate change that becomes more and more severe. Still, we not really see actions. Things are happening, but too slow, and this holds especially for Norway, I think. So where we still pump oil and is pretty much fossil-based. So my plan was to write a very small book with sharp arguments, basically scientific arguments again, to show that this is serious. We have to do something. This is nothing that will pass over by itself. We need to do something, and there was a sense of urgency that I really felt. So, but when I started writing this small, it should be a tiny but really sharp book. It grew, of course, but because there are so many things you want to focus on. So eventually it became a full-blooded book. And the book that has sold best of all my books, and which I think hit a quite wide audience, from business to politicians to people working in this field.
I will return to the question of why you think it was so popular, that book. But before, what can the reader expect to find in the book? So when approaching the book, what can they expect from it?
Yeah, first it's about climate, of course, and I explain basic aspects of climate, but also the drivers. I try to not let this be a kind of boring book just with numbers and facts. It's about the drivers and a bit about the psychology and everything, but first and foremost, what's rooted in science, what we know, where are we heading when it comes to climate. And then second, it's a very important point to show that there is a second crisis, namely loss of nature or loss of biodiversity. And then I thought it was, and that was also a key motivation for me, to show how tightly embedded these things are, how nature and climate change are embedded, because after all, more than 50% of human CO2 emissions are taken up by nature, by photosynthesis. So this is the largest of all ecosystem services. So if you're not interested in preserving nature for other reasons, you should take care of nature for that reason alone. And I think this is very important to explain, because many people see this as something completely disconnected, but it's not. They are really two sides of the same coin. But then I also, not only explaining the trouble we are into, but also some of the solutions. And there comes the positive tipping points, namely the fact that, well, collectively we can do quite a bit. If many people do a bit here and a bit there, some of this can be substantial. So this is also a very important part of the book, to argue that we can and should do something and feel a responsibility, and that to have a responsibility is a good thing.
Yeah.
So we can all contribute to something better.
So as I see the book, it has 4 main concepts or components, and you may correct me if I'm interpreting the book wrongly, but it has the part about the loss of biodiversity, another part about climate change. It has the concept of tipping points, and it has also the concept of sociocultural tipping points, which we can maybe see as separate just in this exercise. So most of us, and including me, I'm a green criminologist. I work with nature, with environment, but I'm not in the natural sciences. So I wonder if you can explain briefly these 4 components that you have there, starting, for instance, with the loss of biodiversity. So my more concrete question here would be, what are the main myths when it comes to the loss of biodiversity? And what is a more accurate description of the status of biodiversity today?
Yeah, I think first of all, by using this description as loss of biodiversity, many people think this is about some rare mosses and beetles and red-listed species that, well, we should care about them, but it doesn't really matter after all. So the point is to show that it's by and large loss of nature. Of course, embedded in this is loss of biodiversity that we also should protect, but loss of nature has some fundamental consequences for climate and other aspects of human well-being. I mean, there are numerous of these ecosystem services, so we depend on nature. I think that's very important. I think many people do not realize how dependent we are on nature. And then, of course, in this context, it's extremely important to explain the role of photosynthesis, the role of forest for producing and plants to produce everything from all sorts of good, actually, we depend on, to really show our dependency of nature. And then it is to show how dramatically we have impacted nature. We are now in the era of Anthropocene, not formally as a new geological era, but still this has come as a word to describe the situation we are in. Anthropos are humans, so we are in the era of humans. And one of the reasons is that, of course, we changed the climate, but also the other is how tremendously we have changed the planetary surface, then including loss of diversity and nature. So that's the point with to make these numbers and arguments clear, and also that we do not do this because we hate nature. Opposite, all of us love nature, but still nature always loses because we tend to see that this is free. It costs nothing to use nature for something else, to convert it into agricultural land or to pave it by asphalt or whatever we do. It comes with tremendous cost, both monetary and health issues, but also, of course, in terms of carbon sequestering and storage. And then the point is to link how very well this is connected with climate. And if it wasn't for the fact that nature took up, first of all, sequestered lots of carbon. Lots of carbon is stored in the ocean, it's stored in soils, in forest, etc., in permafrost, which we work quite a bit on in my group. If it wasn't for this, there will be much higher levels of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
And I think there are some misunderstandings when it comes to the laws of nature. There are very popular and emblematic campaigns about, for instance, the polar bear and other of these charismatic species.
Yeah.
What are the main misunderstandings that you see out there, and why is it important to understand it correctly?
Yeah, I think if we have, as you say, these charismatic animals, the pandas, in Norway, the salmon, the polar bear, not the least, and I think it's important to have these symbolic and iconic species to show that they are vulnerable. But of course, what really matters are the things we really don't see. It's the microbial organisms, the unicellular, the bacteria, the phytoplankton in the sea. Those are the big players. And there are many species that we don't even know the name of. So a key point is that we cannot just go after specific species to preserve them. We need to preserve the habitat they live in, and large habitats and ecosystems. And when we do that, we also preserve all these nameless small species that are actually very important for carbon cycling and everything else.
Yeah. So talking about now moving to the next big block of the book, which is climate change. I think climate change, to me and to many, we understand the concept, but maybe not the depth of climate change. So again, there are quite a few books out there, and they are a little bit depressing. They paint this very dim, dark, sad scenario. What's your take on the status of climate change, and how should we relate to it? How serious is it?
Yeah, I mean, the very title of the book, Tipping Point, might indicate that we are pretty close to the end of the world, which we are not. And this is very important. I repeat this several places in the book that, well, this will not be the end of the world and neither the end of humanity. But of course, we need higher ambitions than the barely survival. So, and it's important to understand at least a minimum of the carbon budget, how this is cycled, how carbon actually acts as a greenhouse gas. From time to time, actually quite often, I get this question, well, after all, there is 0.04%, something like that, CO2 in the atmosphere. How can really this matter? It's a gas that is non-toxic. It's a gas that plants need. Is it really possible that this is a problem? But it is. It's too much of a good thing. So the level of CO2 has, in the past 3-4 million years, and probably even before that, oscillated somewhere between 200 and 300 ppm, which is just ideal for a natural greenhouse gas impact. But now it becomes too much of this beneficial gas in many ways. And it's like having thicker glasses in your greenhouse. It traps more heat, and now it traps so much heat that it's dangerous. The planet is heating up, and it's not only the average temperature, it's all the extremes that follow: floods, droughts, heat waves, avalanches, all sorts of forest fires, not the least, plus many others. So it's important to understand how CO2 acts, why it is dangerous, although it's a good gas in many ways, beneficial gas, we need it. And also, of course, why do CO2 increase? And to point the fact that there is no reason to dispute today that the rise in CO2 that we can measure all over, I think nobody can argue against that, lots of data showing this, is by and large man-made these days. Back in the history before human arrived at this planet, it was also different sources, and it still can be with massive volcanic eruptions and things like that. But today it's human emissions of CO2, and then it's how this works, how does it act as a greenhouse gas, and the simple physics behind this, which has been known for 150 years. So my point is to make clear that this is really nothing to discuss anymore. Believe in this, and then of course what this will cause of trouble that's yet hard to say. How the ecosystems and society will respond if we increase this by 2 degrees, on average, or 3 degrees, that's harder to say, except that every 1/10 of a degree is something we should avoid, and every 1/10 of a degree we can move the temperature down is kind of victory.
Okay, so we have these two elements. We have the loss of nature, we have climate change, and we know that they affect each other, right? The warmer it is, the more nature we lose, and the more nature we lose, the warmer it will get, right? And then you have a third concept, which is the concept of tipping points. What does that mean?
Yeah, tipping point. I mean, normally we think that we can predict the future, and if we affect something, it will be a gradual change that we can adapt to and foresee and plan for. And all policy and governance is also geared towards this, something that is foreseeable and predictable. Even if things change, it changes in a gradual and predictable manner. But this is not the case. And this holds not only for nature, it holds for, well, think about economy and many things in society that can seemingly go well until it hits some level where it suddenly changes dramatically. You can have stock collapses and things like that. And in nature, we see this quite often at the local level, that things go seemingly well for quite some time, even if you stress the ecosystem, whether it's temperature or reduced area or whatever. But then you hit a certain level where things tend to collapse or suddenly change dramatically. This holds also for animal population. We have many examples where you have exterminated populations and, well, they have been reduced, but apparently they still thrive, although at a lower level, but suddenly they hit some wall where they more or less collapse.
What is a concrete example of a tipping point?
Well, in terms of animals, it's the passenger pigeon, which was the most abundant bird likely that ever lived on Earth, that was hunted, and still there were plenty of it, but it was hunted to a level where it suddenly collapsed. But in the terms of the tipping point that we are discussing today, and which is related to climate, things like irreversible meltdown on the Greenland ice sheet. If you hit a certain threshold, this meltdown will be irreversible. It's a kind of spiraling impact with positive feedbacks. The same with the Amazon forest. If that becomes more fragmented, it dries up, the internal hydrological cycle is disrupted, then the Amazon can, in terms of a few centuries, turn into a savanna. Of course, with massive feedbacks of carbon that used to be in the forest that now enters the atmosphere. Of course, with a tremendous loss of unique flora and fauna, species that live only there. This is the species richest ecosystem on the planet, at least on Earth. And of course, also a loss for living places for indigenous people. So, but anyway, this is not unlikely if the warming and fragmentation and fires in the Amazon continues. Also, we have tipping points in coral reefs, and in Norway we are very concerned with what we call the Gulf Stream, this warm northern current that comes from the Gulf up to Norway and make the Norwegian coast and large part of Northern Europe actually quite pleasant to live in summertime. That will change if this warm current collapses, which is not unthinkable. There are others also, but that's the kind of abrupt changes we fear, that at a certain level might certainly be an unpleasant change.
So I guess the key question...
I should just say, these collapses are not the end of the world either, but they make things more difficult.
Yeah. So how far, I know it's difficult to answer to this, but how far are we from those tipping points, would you say?
Yeah, we have now just presented a new report, or made a new report. We have made this once before for the previous COP meeting, the upcoming COP meeting, which is a climate top political meeting that now will take place in Brazil this fall. We have made a new report now, updated report on tipping point that actually will be launched on the 13th of 13th of October, so it's pretty soon. And there we explore this and try to put number on it. And then some tipping points like the Greenland ice sheet and part of the West Antarctic ice sheet might already have hit a tipping point. Hopefully and likely the Amazon has still some tenths of a degree left before it hits the tipping point, and the Gulf Stream so far seemed to be on the safe side, but it will not be if we continue to heat up. So this is a way to argue that the precautionary principle here is important, because there might be sudden and unpleasant changes in the future if we continue as now.
So this sounds quite dramatic. The situation, quite serious, something that we need to pay attention to. And the question is, how can the readers trust that these measurements and descriptions are accurate? Why should they rely on your account of these processes in the book?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's because it's the best we have of knowledge. It's based on science and peer-reviewed scientific papers, lots of what scientists write. So, although, of course, something might be wrong, science is not 100% secure, but it's the best we have. And the major issues here can be trusted, of course. These tipping points, that not exact, we do not know any exact temperature limit, because these are immensely complicated systems and there are lots of feedbacks and things that influence each other. But I think the overall picture and the fact that we are hitting serious trouble if we continue to warm up the planet and continue to lose nature, that's definitely something that can be trusted. But again, I think it's very important to state, especially for young people, that, well, still there is a day tomorrow and you should not give up. Rather the opposite, this should motivate you. That's a key aspect of the book. Try to motivate people to do something, because, as I said, the cumulative effect of what we all do can have a tremendous impact in the positive direction. So good tipping point can, to some extent, prevent dangerous tipping point.
Yeah, so you explain many of the biological processes in the book, so the readers can go to the book and check that. So we can now move to these social and cultural tipping points. How would you explain those tipping points which are not natural in the same way? What do they mean, and what are examples of those tipping points?
Yeah, I can first start with saying some people would say that, well, I should not feel responsibility for this. This is due to the politicians and the business people. They should fix this. I would say, yeah, they should. Clearly, this is a responsibility for politicians and companies and whoever that emits CO2. But we should not forget that by and large, it's the impact of individual choices, individual consumption and individual release of greenhouse gases that creates the problem. So by starting with ourselves, we can be part of a good change and good tipping point. So it's not the only solution, but it can be part of the solution, and part of being personally responsible also to vote for the right politicians. For those of us that are fortunate enough to live in a democracy, we can vote for the right politicians, right in this sense, that do the right green stuff. But over the history there have been many such tipping points, and this is partly psychology driven and partly driven by interesting aspects in society that sociologists are also interested in, and many others. Social anthropologists are also interested in this and observe this. So let's take an example. For instance, in Norway, women get the voters' right in, I think it was 1912. Before that, it was unthinkable. I mean, voting should be just for men, and before that, just for the wealthy men, right? And but then it was realized that this was unfair. Why should not women have equal rights to men, at least have the ability to vote? And as soon as this was realized that it's a fair thing, the majority shifted for seeing this as something impossible to something that was possible and even morally right. And then they get the voters' right, and of course today everybody agrees that this was the right thing to do. It was the same with slavery. Once it was argued that it was impossible to grow cotton in southern part of North America without slaves. well, other parts of the world for that sake. Then also this was realized that this was morally wrong, and from being something that was seen as impossible, it was suddenly possible and morally right to stop the slavery. And there are many other examples. In Norway we have a smoking ban. That's the same in many other countries. And this was implemented not that many years ago in restaurants and public places. Was a lot of resistance because this is something we never had done. It would ruin the restaurant business segment, and bars and pubs would be avoided if people couldn't smoke there. Then this was forced through, and afterwards everybody realized that, well, this was a good idea. And we can see how fashions change, how music, taste, hairstyle, everything, lots of things that are not that serious change when sufficiently many people see that this is a good thing. And the same with technology. Today, again, using Norway as a good example, almost all new cars are electrical cars, electric vehicles. And this was seen as something, if you ask people 20 years ago, that would seem as completely naive to argue and claim that this would happen. Of course, there are issues also with electric cars, but again, they do not emit CO2. So partly due to a shift in attitude among people, partly motivated, of course, by political incentives. It was cheaper to buy an electric car. Suddenly this shifted from diesel and gas cars to electric cars.
So in the book, and this is something I recommend readers to check, you explain how people have been warning about these trends of overexploiting nature for a century. We think about Malthus, perhaps, and then 50 years more from Rachel Carlson and so on, the Club of Rome, etc. So if people have been warning about this for so long, as a century or 50 years, why haven't we changed? Why do you think is the reason for that?
Yeah, and that boils down to psychology to a large extent, but also the fact that, well, we think that the world seems the same. There are still green surroundings, birds arrive in the spring, and things seems pretty natural. And that has to do with the fact that we don't really realize the changes. They happen so slowly that we don't really see them until if you see a picture of an old landscape, then we realize how dramatically it has changed. It's like seeing, if we see ourselves in the mirror every day, it's the same face that meets you. If you see a picture, especially when you start growing old like me, if I see a picture of myself as a young, then I realized, well, things have really happened. So this is the shifting baseline syndrome, that we really don't realize the changes. The other thing is that we really are resistant toward changes, and especially if there are changes that we think affect our freedom. If we'd like to go with flights and eat meat and do everything we have done before, we don't want to hear about this. And also there are some systematic problems. I think many people would like to do something, and I mean, many of the things we can do also probably would support the quality of life. So it's not really that costly as many people believe.
So what would you invite people? What are the changes that people can implement to live in a more respectful relationship with and within nature?
I think I saw also a wallpaper which I made a photo, which I often refer to, which stated that the greatest threat or risk to this planet is the belief that someone else will save it. I think this is a very important message, because that's what we do. Even if you are concerned, you think that there is nothing I can do really, and it doesn't matter what I do. And then it means that if you do nothing, thing continues as before. No one can be perfect, but if you do something that reduces your cost of nature and greenhouse gas emissions by 25%, which absolutely is compatible with a normal modern lifestyle. It's just that you overuse less. Then it matters if everybody do this. So There's a book of a colleague of mine which captures this very nicely. The title of her book is You Matter More Than You Think. And I think that's a good message and a take-home message. And it's also a message we can take as individuals. We can be part of a good transition. It's not easy to do, but if many do it, then suddenly we have this positive tipping point. And this can be implemented in all areas. I mean, this tipping point report we now deliver at the COP meeting, half of that report describes various types of social tipping points and technological tipping points, etc.
Yeah.
And I should also say that it's something we can take as a take-home message for the group we belong to, our university, our job, our local community, and also at the national level. We often hear in Norway that it doesn't matter what Norway do because we're such a small country. Well, first of all, it's not right because we produce lots of oil and contribute lots of to CO2. And also many people look to what a wealthy country like Norway does or do not do. So I think this wallpaper, I mean, that states a very important message.
There is this criticism by philosopher Zizek. He said the problem with environmentalism and their campaigns is that the life they propose is boring, is not appealing.
Yeah.
It's a life of restraint, it's a life of lacks, of gaps, of not enjoying, of refraining yourself from doing things.
Yeah.
How can we motivate people to live more environmentally friendly without feeling like a big sacrifice?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point. So it's kind of party killer, everything. You can't do this and you can't do that. Everything that seems fun and nice and you shouldn't go on a holiday, shouldn't eat meat, etc. So the point is that you should do less of it. And that would probably not be a sacrifice. It could even be good for your health. And interestingly, during the pandemic, we saw that then there were bans on traveling and people started doing things more with the family. They slowed down, they geared down and spent more time in the vicinity or where they lived, in parks or the nearby nature with their kids and friends. And actually many people argued that they really felt that quality of their life had improved. So I think many people have pointed to this, that it's not really a sacrifice. Well, there could be some sacrifices, we shouldn't deny that, clearly, but there are also lots of benefit. So everything we say no to implies also that we say yes to something else. And again, this is not an argument to going back to where we were in the 50s or 60s or even before. I think the evolution of societies and that should happen, and there should be a future we want to explore. There should be new inventions. I mean, we should definitely look forward, new smart technology also. But the point is that this overspending we have now, and especially because we don't have a circular economy yet, so this is use and throw away, especially in a wealthy country like ours, we see lots of that. That's something we should sacrifice, and I think that wouldn't deprive life from quality, rather the opposite. Plus, I think it's very important that if there is one thing that really is specific for humans, is that we are seeking something, purpose or meaning in our life. We're not normally, people are not just happy by being alive or eat and drink and but we want to do something that's good for something that's larger and good for the future and good for the grandchildren. I think most people have that desire. So by being part of this collectively change to something that's better, and I honestly believe better for us as well, we are also part of something that's really meaningful. It has a purpose, and at least for me personally, I think this is very important. That's the reason why I still use lots of time to argue and write books and being in debates and
come to interviews and so on.
Yeah, well, this is just a pleasure, but
yeah.
Not everything of this is a pleasure when you meet people that are completely disagree with you in an angry way. But it gives meaning. I think it's important to do it.
And you wrote this book, of course, with a view from Norway, because you're Norwegian. This is where you grew up. So first, how would you describe Norway as a society when it comes to this? In my view, I'm Colombian. I have been living here for 10 years, and I think it's a highly consumerist country compared to the other places where I have lived. Would you agree with that? And how would you otherwise characterize Norway?
Yeah, I'm a bit strong with Norway in this book also, because we should be a kind of forerunner, because we are wealthy, we have a high level of education, we have a high level of trust, it's a well-functioning democracy and all that. So actually we have all the right things, but then we also are heavily oil dependent. So much of the wealth in Norway is of course based on oil and, well, increasingly, to an increasing extent also gas. Gas is better than oil. Oil is better than coal, of course. But still, so this makes a kind of hypocrisy in Norway. We are green in many ways, and we are good in negotiations, and we have the right goals, but we are not able to separate our wealth from the oil. So I spent some time on Norway in this. But of course, humans all over the world are pretty similar. We have the same desires. We laugh of the same thing. We fear the same things. So humans are humans wherever you are. So I think that, which has to do with things that is sacrifice or desire and things like that, which I discussed quite a bit, that's common for all humans. But it's important that many of those that really, I mean, the richest percent in the world emits about equal amount of CO2 and greenhouse gases and destroy nature, equivalent of the poorest half of the world. So it's this incredibly disproportional impact here. And that makes nations like Norway especially responsible. So those that, are less to blame for this this situation is those that will suffer the most, and already does, by increased sea level rise, heat waves, drought, forest fires, etc.
So now that this book has been translated to Spanish, it means that readers in countries in Latin America, Spain and other places that emit or contribute much less to climate change will access it. How should they approach the book, considering that they are not as responsible as the people you're talking to when you first thought of the book? So one example I can give you is, last time I was in Brazil, I was visiting some friends, and I was talking about the importance of protecting nature, and the person with whom I was chatting, he's Brazilian, and he said, well, you live in a rich country, in an economically rich country, and you are so rich because you have exploited nature. And now you come to Brazil, where we have not enjoyed all the material benefits of exploiting nature, and you tell us that we should not do that. So you want to enjoy that without allowing us to do that. So how should these readers who have that frustration and want to also live at the standards of material conditions that we have in Norway approach the book?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a very valid point, and I even think that Bolsonaro, when he was president in Brazil, used that argument against Norway when we argued that he should protect more rainforest, and it's a valid argument. I think the same was used by from India when they were criticized for not stopping with the coal, but building coal-fired plants. That, well, who are you to blame us when you are a rich country that still exploit oil? So first of all, that's important. So I would rather say that the reason for protecting the rainforest is also because it benefits Brazil, and not only Brazil, of course. There are many countries there that have rainforest, and by protecting rainforest, you first of all protect the biodiversity, you protect the indigenous people, you also protect the climate, because these rainforests are incredibly important for the climate regulation. So you shouldn't do it for us, you should do it for their own sake. But of course, it's clearly that wealthy countries like Norway should be those that reduce their emissions most strongly, and also their consumption, absolutely. And there are countries in the world that definitely deserves a higher level of standard of living. But you shouldn't do that by chopping down the rainforest or by burning coal or by mining in indigenous territory. That's not a good way, and it's not a sustainable way either to maintain a good country. So there are many reasons not to follow in the bad footsteps that we have taken. There are hardly any nature left in parts of Europe. Yeah, we have done the right thing, and we are not in the moral right to tell others what to do, but still I think it's important to tell this story. And we are all in the same boat, that if climate really goes astray and if we lose too much nature, it will hit everybody hard.
Okay, so readers or viewers can find these debates, these explanations and more in the book. So I hope most people can find a copy of the book. But we know that not everyone has the possibility to acquire the book or to borrow the book. So for those who are watching this, whether they find the book or not, what is the message that you would like to leave them to close this conversation?
Well, I think everyone should take a step back and ask, what is a good life? I mean, clearly certain material goods are needed, but beyond that, what really creates a good life? Well, most people would say it's nature, at least we do here, that here. It's friends, it's love, probably a good meal, things like that, that do not really emit lots of CO2 and have big costs of nature. So I think we have had a period now with incredibly economic growth. We know that it cannot continue on a global basis. So we need, again, and especially, of course, as in the global wealthy north, to take a step back. But I think everybody can do that and ask themselves, what is a good life? What is a meaningful life? What constitutes meaning for me, and how can I contribute?
Perfect. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you
Yes.
very much.